Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your host, Ryan Ray and Josh Shelton.
And we're back with the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. We appreciate you tuning in to episode 193. 193. Ryan, we are stepping out of the ice age of Texas. We are warm. We have power. Hoping everybody else listening in Texas is doing all right, have water, power, energy, heat. What a week last week, Ryan. Man, it was crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, man, it was. I know that luckily for you and me, we somehow came out unscathed for the most part. A lot of our neighbors necessarily didn't, and so we were kind of just, I don't know how, but I thought I had a busted pipe on one of my outside faucets, but it didn't. So. But our neighbor, I think I told you, like they have their house is carved into the river, and so it's got 3 floors because of that, and so all 3 floors are ruined because they had like a pipe burst, and so it just dripped through. So they're out like 3 to 6 months of their house, and so you just go, oh man. We had other people. I know y'all saw some folks in the neighborhood who had some bad stuff. So anyway, so we came out clean somehow without power for a little while, but other than that, it was all things considered, can't complain. As you say, everyone out there, hope you guys are well and safe, and you're warm now at least because it's Texas and it's going to be 70 degrees today.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, we were without power for a couple of days, and we have an electric fireplace, which was a huge mistake. Never do that, guys. That is not the way to go. So we lived out in the car for about 36 hours out of that 2 days, just trying to stay warm.
You could have came over to my house. We invited you. You wouldn't come.
Well, I heard there was a little sickness going on over there, and I couldn't handle being icicles and sick. So,
oh man, but yeah. So, anyways, hope everyone's doing well. And before we get into the podcast, the show is sponsored by the War Room Newsletter. The War Room Newsletter has coverage of all kinds of things: U.S., international markets, stuff like that. So. If you want to support Josh and myself, the best way to do that is go to or use the link in the show notes. So you get 30% off forever. So if the price goes up, you're still getting 30% off your yearly or monthly rate, which is $70 for a year, $7 for the month. Help Josh and your boy out. 4 years in, Josh. 4 years in to this podcast, and so we're saying, hey, you know what? Throw a few bones our way. $7 a month. I mean, that's like. You drink one of them fancy mocha latte deals from Starbucks, you're always getting something like that. So it's one of those a month, right?
Yeah.
One of those a month. And so, anyways, so help the show out, support the show. We would really appreciate it. And the War Room Newsletter comes out, depending on what we have going on, 2 to 4 times a week. Has some pretty robust discussions in there, I think. So, Joshua, let's see here. I know we have David Blattman coming on here in a little bit.
Couple of reviews that came in.
We go there next.
Yeah, we'll go there next. Just rip it off. It's Band-Aid. Just rip it off.
So there's 2. I'm gonna spin this for you. I got to spin here. We have a 2-star and a 3-star, which combines to make a
5-star.
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't take anything less than a 5-star. So we'll read this as one review, I think, because it's one 5-star review, right? Podcast on wearing masks. Why waste time on opinions on wearing masks in oil and gas podcast? If I want to learn about COVID, I'd go elsewhere. Not here for your bad COVID takes. Love the oil and gas commentary, though. So that is one 5-star review. When you combine a 2 and a 3 together, you get one 5-star review. And listen, we understand that, that folks are, they're here for oil and gas, but you know who to blame? The listener. We had a listener on our live stream bring up the mask thing, right? Well, I think we brought something up, and then can't have both ways. You want to engage, we engage, and then you get mad. I'll just say this for the folks: if you actually want to engage on COVID takes, email me. Be happy to talk about it anytime. I'll bring you on Inside the War Room. We'll have a very, very lengthy discussion on the topic if you so desire. However, I got a feeling because you can't put your real name out there, we will not hear from you. We do have a true 5-star, though, from Rhino54326. Listen to you guys weekly on my way into Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania. ETP, sorry. Very good, to the point podcast, keeping me up to date And thank you very much. See, that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. Love us or hate us. We need that artificial. We need that. We need to say that we're great. We're geniuses. This is a great podcast. Listen, we've got wives and 4 kids, 5 kids respectively. We get criticized routinely. Like we don't need that in the reviews. Okay, we come here for an ego boost. Okay, we can't take it. If you don't like our COVID takes, that's fine. Just slide to us, or at least put it behind a 5-star review. We can't come here. I'm gonna go to this podcast. I got 4 kids coming home this afternoon, or 3 kids coming home this afternoon from school. Josh has got 5 right around his house, and I've got 1 here right now. It's chaos. So this is like a reprieve. It's like our safe spot. So go ahead and drop those 5 stars. We're trying to get to 300 before we get to our 4-year anniversary, which is coming up in a couple weeks.
Well, Ryan, there's been lots of information coming out. If you didn't know what ERCOT was last year, now you do. They are the ones in charge of Texas energy policies. So there's a lot that went on this week, Ryan. You're the War Room. I think the article that you released, it was probably the best article on ERCOT and Texas and exactly what happened in existence in the world. Probably. I mean, I was
$7 a month. Well, actually, this was free, but yes, it was a good one. Mark Sano. So I got a question for you, Josh, because let's talk about this. The question that I've been weighing in my mind. So let's take the people across the street who had their pipes burst, okay? And so their house is ruined. Now they have homeowners insurance in this case. I don't know how that works typically. And so they're covered. I guess mine said a deductible. I don't know all the details, but they're basically covered. So they're getting put up in a condo. Their expenses are covered. My question to you is, generally speaking, this is not a windstorm or a tornado, kind of the act of God that blows over the infrastructure, right? It's not something like that. This is a extreme cooling tip time, and the grid wasn't able to handle it. Should ERCOT or whoever be liable for damages in this case?
That's interesting questions. I've been thinking about that as well, because it's not that a transformer went out, they lost power, and everything happened. What happened specifically was a company decided to stop allocating power to their house, which caused all these damages. Now, just to be clear too, one of the things that actually makes sense to me, and I know a lot of people were upset. I mean, I was cold, didn't like it, but I also understood that the goal for ERCOT, if I understand it correctly, was to make sure that power to hospitals was maintained. Yeah. Now, hospitals is not all there is, but that's a big one. And so if you were in a certain vicinity of hospitals, then your power was much more protected, say, than someone like me who's, maybe 20 miles away from one. That makes sense to me to do that. I think for the government to try to protect these areas so that if there is an outage, is there a way they can reroute energy to these hospitals? It's unfortunate when people lose energy, but it makes sense to at least have a goal to keep that in place. The issue is, one, who decides who loses and gets energy, because they may reroute it from, say, 2 neighborhoods and leave a third one alone. But who's in charge of this? Because is there a chance that third neighborhood, are they lobbyist donors or whatever to, right. You start getting all these problems that happen. Yeah. So it's hard. It's a hard question. I don't know if they're liable or not. I think,
well, let me ask you like this. So, again, and I want to be very clear that we mean you didn't have any problems with our house. So we're kind of speaking outside looking in on at least this problem. But if there's a pipeline leak on the next property over, to bring kind of a direct oil and gas type problem, the pipeline leak and the seepage from the oil gets on your property. Well, we all agree that the pipeline company should be held liable for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter unless the farmer or someone struck the pipeline to cause it. If it's just a leak that happens, the pipeline companies should be held liable to whatever extent the damages are done. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Okay. This is kind of how I view the power company. So on some level, I have my house that I purchased, been in for 4 years now, right? And I don't have it winterized beyond whatever it was when I purchased it, because I presume, generally speaking, that the power will be on 24/7, 365. Now, I know if there's a hard freeze and limbs break, that some lines might go down. I might lose power for 12 hours, for 24 hours. Like I understand that that's kind of right because you can't control all factors all the time. But I generally presume that there could be, barring an act of God, to use the term, that I'm going to have power. This, so the storm is, you could say, the act of God, but this is also bad preparedness. And so because of that bad preparedness, you have people who were out of power for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And that to me is not the same as saying, well, there was a limb that fell on a power line and it messed up power to the neighborhood, and power was out for 24 hours and something bad happened. Like, that's terrible. That's bad. But this is bad preparedness. And so it's a trade, but then you have to be careful saying, well, this is a once in a 10-year event. So do you want to pay more for it? So you get into all these questions. And I don't have an answer today, but I've been thinking about it. I was curious your thoughts because we don't want to say, well, they can't be liable because this was kind of a tough thing, but we also don't want to say they're liable for every time the power goes out either. You know, there's that fine line. So I don't have an answer. I'm just curious, and if listeners have a thought, I'd love to hear their thoughts as well.
Yeah. So as it stands right now, so give you some examples of what's going on in our neighborhood. We have a lot of folks out here. This was ranked the number 6 retirement community in the nation. Our next door neighbor was on oxygen and lost power, so he couldn't run his oxygen tank. So he was in a frenzy. He had people that were trying to come in and help. There were a lot of people that did not have access to things that they really desperately needed. And the ERCOT, when they shut it off, there were other neighborhoods all outside of our neighborhood that were getting it. Now, the issue is we have a really big neighborhood, so you could get a lot of energy reallocated by just shutting off this neighborhood. But if somebody dies, there's all sorts of liabilities that could stack up with ERCOT. That's possible.
So let's take that neighbor example. That's a good one because that's one of the things I was mentioning earlier about you knew some folks. Okay, so if a tornado blows a tree onto a power line and the power goes out, or a hard freeze, let's just say, either way, the power goes out, and in this case the gentleman did not die, but in this case, this makeup case, the power is knocked out because of a windstorm or something like that, and the person dies because they can't get their oxygen. You know, I don't think you could say they're liable in that case, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is a little bit different, it seems, because there is a level that you could have done to prepare. And they were deciding who would and wouldn't get power, but my understanding is that if they didn't do that, they were afraid the whole grid could collapse for like months, or at least a month. So their argument is, well, we had to do this. So again, I don't have the answers. I'm just saying I'm thinking through it, curious your thoughts, but I think that's kind of the thing, is that if the tornado blows this transformer up, or these power lines down, and the old person dies because they didn't have power and they froze to death, or it was too hot, they couldn't get their oxygen. That's terrible. That's sad. Don't want ever to happen again. But also, I don't know if they're liable. I don't know if the power company would be liable in that case. In this case, though, with lack of preparedness, and also maybe you could say that, and just curious your thoughts here, Josh, maybe you could say, well, okay, there's not much they could have done except for warn you before, like Sunday night, like a week ago. Hey, this might happen, and if this happens, here's what we're thinking about. We're taking the power out, because they know the power usage. It's not like they don't know where the power is being sucked from. To your point, right? Yeah. So maybe they could say, hey, if you're in these spots, we're likely to take your power away for 24 hours or whatever. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts, but
yeah. Well, that would have been very helpful, because had it not been for you letting me know, I would have had no anticipation of being out without power. So I kind of expected to be without power for 48 hours, hoped that I wouldn't be, but basically expected it based on what you said. And so we were able to go and get a few things and get kind of ready, and I say ready, I mean, we just had, finger food, stuff that we could eat, as we knew that, the refrigerator wouldn't be cooked. We got covers and stuff all set up. So when it went out, it was like, okay, well, we're kind of ready for it. It would have been very helpful if we'd had 2 weeks of it, in advance. We may have went and got a hotel, or planned to go somewhere, or went to Cancun.
Well, it's nice this time of year down there.
Yeah.
To the point is a listener texts me like, "Hey, this grid stuff is concerning." So that's how I know. So thank you to the listener. You know who you are. I won't say your name because I think you want to be anonymous, but we appreciate it.
All right, we have our good friend, guest David Blackman. He's a Forbes contributor, and he over at the Shell Mag. You check him out. He puts out stuff, I think, every day or at least
all the
every
time,
week.
man.
Yeah. Well, so David, great to have you back on the show. We've had a crazy week this week here in Texas,
Sure
and so we wanted to talk with you about ERCOT. Me and Ryan have been talking about that for last few minutes, and we've been discussing the whole concept of liability. Are these energy companies, if people lose power, they don't have oxygen, they can't use their machines, or their house pipes bust because they can't keep the house warm. What sort of liability is there, or is there actually, or what sort of liability should there be for these companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I told you a little bit ago, I'm not a lawyer, so the reality is I don't think any of them were actually violating any regulations. They haven't been required, unfortunately, I think erroneously, by Texas officials to winterize their facilities. They've known about the need. I mean, certainly since 2011, when we had a very similar event and similar blackouts caused by all kinds of plants freezing up and wind turbines freezing up. After that event, the PUC and the legislature should have mandated winterization of these facilities. But they chose not to do that for political reasons largely, and because the cost would ultimately fall on consumers. They didn't want to have to answer phone calls from constituents complaining about power bills. And so we've had a replay here 10 years later. So should there be liability? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I mean, the simple reality is I don't believe any of the power providers or pipeline companies or producers were violating any of the rules. So I think the problem is with the rules, frankly. And if there's any liability, it ought to be at the voting booth.
Hey, amen.
I just came up with that, by the way.
Amen. I like that. Well, I don't want to pound this home too, Mark, talk about oil and gas stuff as well. But one of the things we've said on this podcast for 4 years now, I guess, is, because we're anti-regulation in the sense of we don't want draconian rules.
Me too.
We want people to be held liable when they make mistakes like you would anywhere else. And so, now, to your point, you don't want probably frivolous lawsuits that are just draining these companies every day. And so it's kind of a hard balance, but it's a discussion that I think we need to kind of have as people here in Texas going, how do we deal with this? Because, okay, well, they weren't required to by the state. Well, does that give them immunity from not doing it? And if so, it's a tough question, but my fear is that you go too far one way where you get, extreme regulation, and it's like, okay, well, that didn't work. And then the other way is, there's people being sued. There needs to be more, and this, I would say, whatever we're talking about, there needs to be more of a clear understanding of what is the contractual obligation between the power provider and the homeowner. Because, like I was telling Josh, if I would have known, to your point, if I understood fully that, hey, they're not obligated to provide me power when it gets really cold, I would probably get my pipe more insulated. I'd probably do things differently.
Have a backup generator.
Have backup generators, right? So if the general public maybe understood that would. So I don't know how you fix that problem, but I'm always kind of reluctant to say, and I agree with you in the voting.
I know how you fix it.
Go ahead.
I'll tell you how you fix it. You fix it by completely reforming ERCOT and hiring all new staff to staff ERCOT. Because ERCOT's known for 10 years that we weren't building any new baseload capacity in this state. We haven't built a new gas power plant in 10 years. Haven't built a coal plant in 25 or 30 years. Haven't built any new nuclear in a quarter of a century. So, I mean, what did they think was going to happen? And meanwhile, they're incentivizing, all they're doing is incentivizing more and more renewables to be put on the system. And I don't have any problem with renewables, okay? They have a place, they have a role to play here. But when you're in a weather emergency, whether it be the middle of August and the heat, or the middle of winter and a freezing storm like this, they're worthless. They're useless to us. Okay. We have to have adequate base load, and we have to have a surplus of base load capacity. Most states, it's 20%. Well, we don't even have 10% surplus in Texas. And ERCOT has known that for a decade and done nothing. And the PUC has known that for a decade and done nothing. And the legislature should have known it for a decade and done nothing. So we interviewed Christy Craddock on our radio program yesterday, and she was great, by the way, didn't make any excuses. She was fantastic, really made me feel a lot better about where we might be going here. But I closed the show just by saying, look, we can't do nothing again like we did in 2011. So I just think you either have to have a complete change of attitude among the people who run ERCOT, or just replace them all. And maybe even just create a new state agency rather than this 501c4 organization. I mean, why are we running our state's power grid through a nonprofit organization, for crying out loud? I never have understood that. But anyway, we have to have accountability here. That's where you start to fix the problem, is by holding the people who messed up accountable. And the first people who really messed up, who we know really messed up, and Governor Abbott has been, telling us for a week now, is ERCOT. So that's where you start, and I just think it's got to extend from there.
Josh, I think I'm going to formally nominate David Blackman to take over ERCOT. He won't need any staff.
Oh, my God.
Well, I think from my perspective, given their lack of preparedness, I think they were kind of forced to reallocate energy and shut down. And so at that point, they're kind of, they had no choice at that point. And that's where I don't know about liability in terms of, I think the liability had to be for lack of activity over the last 10 years, not getting prepared. Yeah. Like you said,
and let me tell you how unprepared they were. Last Wednesday, what was that? February 9th, Wednesday before last, when the first of the three cold fronts was hitting us. ERCOT had a board meeting, and it was a 2-hour meeting apparently, and they discussed preparation for this cold event for 45 seconds in a 2-hour meeting. Literally 45 seconds of a 2-hour meeting.
No.
So that's where their mind was. They weren't even worried about it. Well, why weren't they worried about it? I can't even imagine why they weren't worried about it. But it's just maddening to me. It's mind-boggling, and I know I'm going off here, so I guess.
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the things, we'll move on oil and gas stuff after this to let you respond. But one of the things that to me is frustrating is that if you are a free market person like I am, you have to hold the people that are dictating and moving the free market responsible, or you will get the results that you don't want. And so,
right.
and so when we're, one of the frustrations that I see with maybe more of my left-leaning friends is they're like, oh, well, what it's a new government committee to solve. It's like, no. that's gonna make it worse. That's how we got here. So we have to unpack this thing and talk about it. And it's not easy. And that's what unfortunately.
No, it's not easy.
Yeah, and that's what happens to most of us is that we go, well, what liability? I don't know. Prepare to, how do you fix it? And we go, well, someone will take care of it, and then we're off to the next thing, and we forget about it, and it's a problem. So it's not an easy problem to fix, but it's something that I think we have to learn if you want to live in a free society, free market, whatever you want to call it. You have to deal with these issues, think about them, talk about them, hear different perspectives, because everyone's kind of got a little bit different angle, and then really put the onus on people who are in power to solve it, whether it's voting, whether it's litigation, whatever it is. And if you don't, then we'll just come 10 years from now or
be right back. Yeah, because we get one of these events every 10 years, folks. It's like clockwork.
I think when I lived in Louisiana before I left, we were still paying for the Hurricane Katrina disaster relief, and that was back in 2016. So a little bit different there. Okay, so let's talk about oil and gas, David. As I'm looking at right now, WTI is at 61.15, Brent's at 64.65, natural gas is $2.90. Okay, so are we back? Are we back, or are we setting ourselves up for a steep fall here in the next few months?
Well, I think 2 weeks ago I'd have probably said we may be setting up for a steep steep fall. But right now we have so much refining capacity offline in this country right now. I think we're going to have a lot of shut-in production for a while because it's going to take several weeks to get all the refineries back up and running. And so actually, I think we may be in a situation where the price goes even higher. I guess it must be up $2 today.
Yeah.
Alone. And, we had to shut in 3 million barrels a day during this cold event here in Texas. And a lot of that's going to remain shut in for a while. I just think that the situation right now just continues to improve in terms of causing momentum, inertia for higher prices, crude prices. And here's the other thing that people don't talk a lot about, but over the last 3 years, since we've had the price, really a low price environment since 2016, 4 years now, we haven't invested much in new reserves, finding new reserves all over the world. And so foregone an awful lot of new investments in drilling. And here 2 years from now, we could be sitting at $100 oil again because of that, with a very tight supply and demand situation. And particularly, you look out today and now there's a lot of chatter in the news media about this pandemic essentially having run its course by April. I know that doesn't really fit with the agenda of the Biden administration, but that's really kind of the way it looks like it's trending. And, if that's really the case, then demand's going to return with force when the late spring, summer driving season comes around.
Well,
So all that agitates for higher prices.
when you say it's over, are you talking about we can fly freely without mask on and move freely? Or are you talking about we just don't have to hear about it every day in the news media?
Well, we should be able to, but I don't think the government's going to, permit that. I mean, the agenda of this administration is to keep us wearing masks forever, basically. Anthony Fauci over the weekend was talking about, oh yeah, we're going to still be wearing masks through 2022. Well, there's no data that supports that. I mean, there's just nothing. Florida's basically open right now.
Right.
State of Florida is a great example. 22 million people in a state third the size of Texas.
Mm.
State's open. People aren't wearing masks, or they're wearing masks very haphazardly. People are dining inside restaurants. They're at full capacity. There is no outbreak of the virus. Their cases are going down just like everywhere else in the country. Hospitalizations going down just like everywhere else in the country. So, but the administration has an agenda here to keep us wearing masks. So no, I don't think we'll be without masks. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they mandate us wearing 2 masks at one time here pretty soon, just to keep the agenda going. But the reality is the rest of the world's going to deal with the pandemic as it is happening.
Mm.
And as it is happening, it's trending downwards.
Well, it's interesting. Just an aside, there's a good piece. I can't remember who the author was about how China's handled the pandemic and basically how they had moved on from the pandemic by and large March of last year. And so they'll have occasional shutdowns where they'll lock down something, but for the most part, they've kind of moved on. And here we are chasing our tails.
Yeah. With the most cases of any country in the world.
So let me ask you this, because here's my concern with the higher oil prices. If you look at food prices, soybean, corn, all these things, they are sky high right now.
Yeah.
Can we afford higher oil prices? Can the general consumer, who unemployment is still pretty high, can we actually afford higher oil prices? And what happens to an economy where you have these, gasoline prices going up, food costs going up, and people just don't have as much money to spend?
Yeah, I just have to laugh every time I see a publication about the rate of inflation. I have no idea how that's calculated anymore. I mean, my food prices where I shop for groceries here in Mansfield, probably up 30% year over year. Gasoline prices are up 40 cents a gallon since Election Day. We got inflation and we got it big, and that's going to be a problem for the economy, obviously, I think. And it was already kind of a precarious economic situation, so I'm pretty worried about that too. I just don't know how much we can really sustain, especially if we're going to have states like California continuing these draconian lockdown orders, and that just kill jobs and kill small businesses. You really do kind of have to wonder how much the economy can bear in terms of higher fuel prices. But we have them. We already have them, and they're going higher.
Yeah, No, they are, and it's I'm a little bit concerned. Just some of the economic stuff. And just as an aside, some of the food stuff is that if there is concerns about the soybean production in Brazil might not meet the standards. You might even have other factors that inflate the price a little bit more. Okay, so the prices are high. We're going to see folks drill. I know there's folks of people talking about hedging out through 2022.
Boy,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a tough call. I mean, I think every company's got to be looking at that right now. But boy, how do you make that call right now?
Well, so that was my question. So, I was writing a thing for something last night, and it said, will the Saudis put their production back on the market? And I said, if I was the Saudis, I would do everything I can right now to stop the price from going up. If I'm the Saudis, I want it to be, we'll talk about WTI price. WTI 60, bottom out at 50, and then dip below 50 every now and then just to make sure you kind of get that fear in the U.S. market. What do you think the Saudis are going to do? Because, I don't think stop it, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, of course, I don't have any real knowledge, but if I was them, I'd have to be thinking about whether I want to continue to keep that extra 1 million barrels a day off the market, that they're doing in February and March. Seems like with U.S. production, having been shut in so deeply here and likely to be down for the coming several weeks, they might want to say, hey, OPEC plus countries, we're actually going to put that extra million back in because we need to rebalance supply and demand globally. And that's of course always the big question in all of this situation is what is OPEC plus going to do, because it is the real wild card factor in the entire global equation. They still, what are they keeping now? 7.2 million barrels a day off the market, I think, still under that agreement. It's going to go down by 500,000 barrels, I guess, next month. So it'll be 6.7 a day. That's an awful lot of potential production to keep off the market. And so, that thing's got to keep holding together for prices to stay even at these levels. And that's always the wild card here is how long can that last? So we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Saudis, kind of say, what, that extra million a day doesn't make any sense right now.
Well, switching gears back to kind of the opportunity that may be coming up for some companies to capitalize. Being that Texas doesn't have a strong enough base load, I think you mentioned we need 20% surplus base load capacity. There's a great opportunity for coal or nuclear. What are the chances that Texas would do something like that, especially under this current administration?
Yeah, it's just so hard to get coal or nuclear permitted through the EPA, the federal permits that are required. Even though you're building in Texas, you still have to get the federal emissions permits, and that's really, really hard to do. The issue over the last decade has been profitability and how, what is the potential return on investment of building new baseload. So in the first 10 years of the deregulated market that was implemented in 99 by the state of Texas, we had high natural gas prices. And what gets very little discussion in how that system works is, power providers are able to base their fuel charge on your monthly electric bill. You've got the base generation charge and you've got the itemized for the fuel charge. So they're able to base that charge on the highest cost fuel source that they have in their mix. And for the first 10 years, natural gas prices were really high, and they were able to base that fuel charge on the marginal natural gas price when it was $6 to $12 an MMBTU. Well, thanks to the shale revolution, we suddenly went from a very tight supply of natural gas to this overabundance of natural gas. Prices collapsed down to the $3 range, where they still are 10 years later. And so that profitability of building new natural gas kind of dissipated. And no one in the Texas government, knowing this, I've been aware of it since 2009. If I'm aware of it, I would assume the PUC and ERCOT are aware of it. There's no financial incentive to build new baseload capacity in Texas, natural gas or otherwise. So they could have, found ways to provide that incentive and have chosen not to do that. So that's the issue right now is just the return on investment from building new capacity in Texas is just not there. And that's what the legislature has to figure out what to do. The legislature and the PUC have to figure out a method of incentivizing baseload generation. And until they do that, none's going to get built. That's just our reality. Nothing but wind and solar is going to get built. So I just think that's the key to it. The legislature's they're in until the 1st of June. They got 3 months to figure it out. I assume working with the PUC and ERCOT, they'll do that. If they don't do that, then voters need to ask why.
Well, I think, one of the things I've thought about writing a piece in the War Room about this, David. I'm curious, you might slap me around, so I'll roll it out here first. Help me out here. If you look at states like Colorado, Oregon, Washington, with how they've legalized drugs, despite the fact that it's illegal or decriminalized, however you want to put that at the federal level, it causes them problems inside the state. They have to have ATMs and cash and all that stuff. But they said, okay, we're going to do this. Are we at a point, or do we need to consider a point where Texas looks at some of our energy policy and says, you know what, we want to build a new coal plant. We can't worry about the federal regulation, or we want to build a new nuclear plant. The federal regulations are too draconian. Is that a viable option for Texas to consider, to ignore some of these federal oversights? Because you've seen, like Colorado and these other states, at least with drug legalization, the feds really haven't done a whole lot to slap them down. We ignore the feds on some of the stuff.
Well, but of course, popular culture and the news media are all for legalized marijuana. Popular culture and the news media are not for new coal-fired power plants. And politicians and the regulators at the federal level respond to popular culture and the news media. So I just think that, while you would kind of hope the state of Texas might consider moving in that direction, I think it's highly unlikely. Natural gas, you might, you can get away with, because combined cycle natural gas plants don't really have a problem getting the federal permits. The problem for natural gas in Texas has been lack of profitability, not permitting. So I just think if we're going to build new baseload, it's probably going to be natural gas, and the state has to figure out a way to incentivize it.
Well, this news media source is for it. So
yes, I understand, but the New York Times, probably are.
No, the New York Times is not. I'll just leave it with this. I say my thoughts on this kind of grid stuff is that I wonder if we were starting over today, if we could have a fresh start, how much more would we try to localize power? And so would you look at maybe the micro nuclear technology and say, okay, you know what, we can use this here, it's 20-year baseload capacity for these type of areas. Would we really do stuff a lot differently? And is that the larger conversation we need to have, instead of trying to, so we have to repair, but instead of repairing for keep, patching this thing up, say, okay, you know what, can we localize this a little bit more? I know this is not feasible for all parts of the state, but localize it and make it a little bit more sustainable. I'll let you get the final word there.
Yeah, I wish we could. I'm like you. I would really love to see more nuclear be built in Texas. It's just beyond my ability to comprehend why environmentalists worried about carbon emissions are against nuclear power. It just makes no sense at all. It's irrational. It's an irrational fear that parts of our society have about nuclear, but that obviously would be the most efficient and effective answer to this, would be to build more nuclear.
And I say that as someone who lives right next door to the nuclear plant or power plant. So it's just, Josh and I we're not afraid. Build some more nuclear over here by us.
I'm just 40 miles from it as the crow flies. So if there's a meltdown, I'm going to get affected too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a 20-minute drive, but I think as the crow flies, we've got to be within like 5 or 10 miles.
Yeah.
It's right there. So, all right, Mr. Blackman, we will let you go with that. Shell Mag, Forbes, DB Daily Update, anything else that you want to point people to?
In the Oil Patch Radio, we do that once a week. It airs Sunday nights on KTRH in Houston and other affiliates statewide. And we had Christy Craddock on yesterday And the podcast is already available out there on iHeartRadio.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was good to get you back on. As always.
Thank you, man. I enjoyed it. This goes too fast.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again for David Blackman for coming on the show. As always, a veteran in the industry, knows a lot, and really appreciate some of his insights. Learned a lot during that interview. So
Yeah,
great
and
having him on.
also, I mean, I think he's kind of like us on the hearing him trying to process, are they liable, are they not liable? It's a problem, and you know, just so everyone knows, behind the scenes, we don't prep with David on what we're talking about. Generally, unless he has a piece like, "Hey, we'll talk about this piece." So that was kind of an off the cuff answer. So for what that's worth, you know, and so I think that issue is one that if you're a proponent of the free market, you have to think through, you have to process, and it's just not easy because it can go so many different directions. And so what the government's role in that is and how they're responsible. So it's just complicated. I appreciated his insight on it. And again, I'd love to hear from the listeners. How do you think we should handle this? Because let's all be honest here. The more government regulation that happens, the more insulated the power companies might be. Now, you might argue that might ensure we have power. Okay, that's a fine argument to be, but we have to kind of think through all of that stuff, I believe, or at least I hope we do. Okay, War Room. Josh, anything else? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's one thing, just as a reminder, just for us to remember. I've seen some reports out there about if the wind turbines would have been winterized, then we wouldn't have had as much issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that. Mm-hmm. And based on what I've seen, I don't think that's the case. I do think that having a winterized would have helped.
Sure.
But I don't think it would have provided enough energy to have prevented the blackouts. And that would be the one thing I wanted to add. I wanted to ask him, but we just ran out of time. So
yeah. So I've seen people have that debate, like, well, the turbines in this part of the world work when it's really cold. They didn't hear.
Yeah.
I'm not a wind turbine expert, so I'm not going to pretend like I have the answer to that question one way or another. If you do, let us know. I would just say that there are sources like nuclear that, okay, the plants could freeze up, which happened in some cases, some stuff in Texas, but there are sources that just run regardless of weather. And they are really, 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 really safe. Okay, yes, if you have a meltdown, but to my knowledge, not a single person on U.S. soil has ever died as a result of a nuclear meltdown. So that's a pretty good track record. So warroomnewsletter.com, thewarroomnewsletter.com. We'll leave a link in the show notes for 30% off for a monthly or a yearly subscription. Help Josh and your boy out. 4 years in, looking for a little support. Bring back Nate. Nate actually said he might come back, Josh. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I didn't see that. I saw that he missed oil and gas.
Yeah. He said the other day that he didn't say he wouldn't return. But you know what? We gotta get the campaign going to bring back Nate, or someone better than Nate at least. So we'll be back again next week. And who do we have a guest next week, don't we? Let's see here. Hold on. I should have this prepared. This is wonderful. This is what gets us those 5-star reviews right here. So next week we have on scheduled. Who is it? Oh, that's David Blackman. That's this week. Oh yeah, we've got someone from Drilling Info, as we call them, or Enverus. So
Enverus.
Yeah, Enverus. Be talking with them next week. And so, anyways, thank you everyone for tuning in. And until next time, keep climbing.